What if I told you somewhere in this world, a part of a woman is still alive, dividing, growing, multiplying 70 years after she died, not as memory, but as living cells. Cells that became the foundation of modern medicine, the cure makers, the vaccine testers, the immortal line. Her name was Henrietta Lacks, a mother of 5, a Black woman from Virginia whose body gave science something it had never seen before: cells that refused to die.
Refused to die? That sounds like a horror movie.
It sounds like science fiction, right? But it's true. Her cells have outlived her, multiplied into trillions, and are still growing today in labs across the world.
Wait, she passed away decades ago, but her cells are still alive? Like, actually alive?
Yes, and that's why this story sits at the crossroads of biology, immortality, and injustice.
Henrietta Lacks' cells, known as HeLa cells, were the first human cells to survive and reproduce indefinitely outside the human body. They divide every 20 to 24 hours, essentially escaping the natural death cycle of normal cells.
So, she's the reason we can test medicine, study cancer, send biology into space.
Correct. The HeLa line has been used in over 75,000 studies. They have circled the Earth aboard satellites. They helped create the polio vaccine, and they continue to define modern cell biology.
All from one woman who never gave permission, who never knew her cells would become immortal. It began in 1951 in a segregated ward of Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. Henrietta came in for a pain she could no longer ignore, a lump in her womb.
Doctors diagnosed her with an aggressive form of cervical cancer. During a routine biopsy, a physician named Dr. George Gay removed 2 small samples from her cervix, one healthy, one cancerous.
Without her consent.
She didn't even know.
No, she thought she was being treated. She couldn't have known that her cells, those tiny unseen pieces of her, would outlive the century itself.
When Gay examined her cells, he noticed something extraordinary. They doubled every 20 hours. They didn't die. He named them HeLa, from Henrietta Lacks.
What followed would change medicine forever. Scientists had tried for decades to grow human cells in the lab. Every attempt ended the same way. The cells died after a few days. But Henrietta's, they kept dividing and dividing. Her body had given science the impossible, a window into immortality.
So she basically became the Beyoncé of biology.
Exactly, the headliner of human biology.
Her cells helped create the first effective polio vaccine. They revealed how viruses replicate. They were instrumental in chemotherapy, genetic mapping, and even COVID-19 vaccine testing decades later.
One woman's cells, touching every generation since, her DNA orbiting space, curing diseases, unlocking life itself. But for all the miracles her cells created, her family lived in poverty. They had no idea what had been taken. No money, no recognition, just an empty space where her story should have been.
It's hard to celebrate science when the human behind it was forgotten.
Exactly. And that's why we're telling her story today, because immortality without justice is just another experiment. She became the woman who lived forever, but her true story, that begins with what science forgot to see, her humanity. Before the laboratories and headlines, there was a morning like any other. Tobacco dew, a dress on the line, children laughing before chores. Henrietta Lacks was not a symbol. She was a woman in a world that needed her in 1,000 tiny ways. Neighbors remember her as soft-spoken but radiant, the kind of woman whose presence felt like a warm quilt.
The kind of mother who makes you feel chosen when she looks at you.
Exactly. Ordinary miracles, the ones history rarely writes down. But the wider world was cold. Jim Crow pressed on every decision, where you could live, learn, and heal.
In the early 1950s, Johns Hopkins Hospital operated a segregated ward that treated Black patients. Medical care was unequally distributed, and research norms rarely included informed consent.
So even when you walked into a hospital, you weren't walking into safety. You were walking into a system.
Henrietta began to feel a pain she couldn't explain, a firmness, a heaviness, the whisper of something growing where it shouldn't.
Examination revealed a tumor on the cervix, aggressive. At the time, standard treatment involved radium.
During a biopsy, 2 small samples were taken, one healthy, one cancerous, without asking Henrietta's permission.
A human being, not a specimen tray.
She trusted the white coats. She trusted the promise of care. Back home, she tried to carry normalcy like a bowl of water. Upright, careful, almost not breathing. Pain does that. It makes you edit your life.
And every mom edits her pain to protect her kids.
She kept loving them forward.
In culture, Henrietta's tumor cells behaved differently. They were robust, dividing every approximately 20 hours. Where other human cells senesced and died, these continued proliferating.
A door opened that science had never walked through. A cell line that wouldn't die.
The day biology got its first superstar.
In the same weeks her cells were taking flight, Henrietta was fading. Treatments were harsh. Pain crept into places that once held joy.
Out there, triumph. In here, loss.
Her doctors were not villains. They were products of their time. But time, as we know, does not absolve harm.
Informed consent standards were not yet codified in the way they are today. The extraction and later commercialization of HeLa occurred in a framework that omitted the patient's voice.
Translation: we celebrated the miracle and forgot the woman.
This is the heartbeat of our story. Science can be brilliant and still be blind. Friends remember her elegance, her painted nails, the way she moved like music. She wasn't just a patient, she was a presence.
A whole universe. And that's what cells really are. Little universes.
This is where the story splits. Henrietta's life bending toward an end. Her cells bending toward a strange forever.
In Act 3, we follow what those cells made possible, and the biology of how a line becomes immortal.
And we'll keep asking the one question every breakthrough should answer. Where is the human in this?
Science called them HeLa cells, 2 syllables that carried a universe. But what made them different? Why did one woman's cancer become biology's endless well?
Most human cells are mortal. They divide a fixed number of times, about 40 to 60 divisions, before entering senescence. Their internal clock is governed by telomeres, protective caps at the ends of DNA strands. Each division shortens them until the cell can no longer divide.
So basically every cell has a retirement plan.
Exactly. Except Henrietta's cells missed the memo.
In HeLa, the enzyme telomerase remained active, rebuilding those caps each time the cell split. Add to that a mutation driven by human papillomavirus type 18 integrated into her genome, and you have a cell programmed to grow without end.
Telomerase, Immortality written into a code no one asked for. Science calls it a mutation. I call it a mirror, a reflection of our refusal to let go.
She died at 31. Her cells never did. Maybe that's why the world couldn't look away.
In 1952, the HeLa line became the testbed for Dr. Jonas Salk's polio vaccine. Thousands of vials shipped to labs worldwide to grow the virus safely and test immunity. Within 3 years, polio cases plummeted across America.
It was the first mass production of human cells in history. Industrial cell culture was born.
One woman in Virginia helped save millions of kids she'd never meet.
In 1960, scientists sent HeLa cells into orbit to see how microgravity affects life. Her cells have literally touched the stars.
So she beat most of us to space.
Data from those experiments laid groundwork for space medicine and radiation safety.
Decades later, HeLa became a template for gene mapping and cancer research. Every microscope slide was a conversation with Henrietta's cells.
Their robustness enabled research into HPV, HIV, and chromosomal behavior. They even helped define the concept of oncogenes, genes that can transform normal cells into cancerous ones.
And all of this before computers could even fit in a room.
While pharmaceutical companies thrived on discoveries fueled by HeLa, her family struggled to afford their own medicine. Science had found a miracle, but lost its mirror.
It's wild how you can save the world and still owe on your light bill.
Ethics in biological research mature through regret.
By the 1970s, the very success of HeLa caused scientific chaos. Her cells were so vigorous, they contaminated other cultures worldwide, altering thousands of experiments.
The HeLa contamination crisis forced researchers to develop cell line authentication, a standard still used today.
So even her cell's wild side changed the rules.
Maybe immortality was never about living forever. Maybe it's about becoming impossible to ignore.
She's in every lab, every lesson, every needle that saves a life.
And in every ethics class, reminding future scientists that data is never disconnected from dignity.
Henrietta's cells gave us knowledge of how life endures, but Act 4 asks how we endure knowledge when it comes at a human cost. By the 1970s, the secret could no longer hide in petri dishes. HeLa had become everywhere. So everywhere, it began to expose itself.
Contamination reports, mislabeled cultures, unexplained results. Scientists trace them back to the same origin, HeLa.
And while they were finally saying her name in journals, her family still didn't even know what HeLa meant.
In 1973, Henrietta's children received a phone call from a researcher. He asked for their blood samples to help with a study. Only later did they realize the truth. He was studying their mother's cells.
Imagine finding out your mother's body never really stopped living from a stranger in a lab coat.
Confusion turned to grief. Grief turned to anger. Her daughter Deborah would spend decades searching for answers about who her mother was to the world and why no one ever told them.
The HeLa revelations accelerated bioethics policy. In 1974, the U.S. established the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects and formalized informed consent standards for research.
It took one woman's unasked gift to change how science asks permission.
That's the wildest part. Her cells taught us about life, and her story taught us about respect.
By the 1980s, journalists finally printed her name, Henrietta Lacks. Her face appeared in newsprint. A mother, not a mystery.
And let me guess, the scientific world was like, oops.
Awareness does not erase harm, but it creates possibility for reform.
Hospitals began reviewing consent forms. Universities added ethics courses. The conversation had changed forever. Deborah Lacks spent her life trying to understand the science that stole and saved her mother. She walked into labs where vials of HeLa glowed like stars and said, "That's my mama."
That line gives me chills every time.
Emotional recognition is data of a different kind. It measures healing.
Her journey was not about revenge. It was about naming, because to name is to honor. In 2010, decades after her death, the world finally began to speak her full name with reverence. The Smithsonian honored her. The U.S. House passed a resolution recognizing her contribution to medicine.
In 2013, the National Institutes of Health reached an agreement with the Lacks family to control access to her genetic data. Her descendants now sit on the committee that oversees it.
Finally, a seat at the table.
Today, we use cells to cure, clone, and code. But Henrietta's story reminds us to ask first, because progress without principle is just power.
Ethical governance is not a constraint. It is the soul of sustainable science.
Translation: just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Exactly. Every time a scientist labels a sample, her name hovers between the letters. Every informed consent form signed today is a quiet thank you to her.
She didn't just change biology. She changed how we see the people behind biology.
Immortality achieved through correction, not just replication.
Justice didn't erase the past. It illuminated it. And in that light, we finally see her. When a story reaches its ending, science asks what we learned. But some stories don't end. They echo. Henrietta Lacks is one of those.
HeLa cultures exist in over 10,000 labs across the planet. Their data supports studies in cancer, genetics, immunology, and space biology.
From Baltimore to Tokyo, from Cape Town to Houston, her cells are still dividing, still teaching us how life adapts.
Kinda wild that a part of her is clocking in for work on 5 continents at once.
Her story now lives in textbooks, documentaries, and the voices of students who say her name with respect. Science has a memory now, and a conscience.
The first immortal cells taught us biology. The woman they came from taught us ethics.
Maybe immortality was never meant for the body, but for the impact we leave behind. Every act of discovery, every change born from her story is a cell of its own, dividing through generations of consciousness.
Replication is the language of life. Legacy is the grammar of meaning.
Translation: we don't live forever by breathing. We live forever by what our breath creates.
Her descendants carry her with dignity. They visit schools, speak at conferences, and remind the world that her cells are not just a resource. They're a reminder that consent is sacred.
Justice doesn't erase pain, but it lets you sleep through the night.
I think about her often, how a woman who never met me might be inside the science that saves me. Her cells still divide, but her story finally multiplies too. That's the balance life was waiting for.
Henrietta Lacks was a patient, a mother, a data set, and now a lesson in empathy. Her cells remind us that knowledge is most alive when it is kind.
She's the proof that the smallest thing in us, a cell, can change the whole world. That's queen energy, if you ask me.
divine power, modern mind, and an immortal heart.